Welcome back. Back again. All right, so today what we're going to talk about is preference activities. Something you might have seen on apps that you've used before is a lot of them have a settings area. So Google uses a settings area whenever you go into settings. And a lot of these things look pretty similar across the different apps that you see, and that's a good thing. So today what we're going to do is we're going to learn about how do you make that preference activity. Google does a lot of things for you. We're going to learn some of the tools that they use, and we'll put another tool in your in your repertoire of things you can do. Just kind of a quick little overview of where we're at course-wise. So we're kind of preparing for what's going to be on the second exam for people in the course. We're going through menus, preferences, and dialogues. So menus was last week. So hopefully you enjoyed the Hello Menus video. And then also put some of the skills to use with the lab for snakes on a menu. What people should have been doing in the last lab is starting with Google's snake sample and making some changes to it to add a menu that lets you do some different things with the menu. So we assume that you've got menus under your belt. We're going to have a nice little reminder of using menus in today's example. And we'll get started with preference activities. The app that we're going to make is called HelloPreferences. So you probably could have guessed that title. What we're going to do with the HelloPreferences app is you're going to have two activities. You're going to have one activity which displays the preferences, so it's really just going to be a bunch of text views that display, what preferences have you selected. And then in order to launch the second activity, the preference activity, which is the focus of today, you're going to click on the menu. So there should be a menu item pop up that says settings. And if you click on the settings menu item, it'll take you into this different activity that's all about preferences. We've got some preferences in here with checkboxes, whether you like cats or dogs, a list box preference to pick your favorite dessert / SDK, an edit box, and then also being able to drill down into separate preference screens. These are the primary features that you're going to need for your next lab, and we're going to try to cover all the different things that you can do with a preference activity. It's fairly easy once you get it under your belt, but it's best to explain with an app, so that's what we're going to do. So as always, go ahead and make yourself a new project that you're going to work with today. You can call it Hello Preferences, although that was a little long for a name, so my activity is just called Preferences. And there's going to be two activities in this, so to avoid confusion with the name, I called this first activity, the one it makes for me, Selected Values, because it'll be like this gray screen here that shows what values are selected. And pick any SDK you like. So I'll go ahead and get mine going here. Android project. I'm going to have to call mine Hello Preferences Video, because I've of course done it already. I'm going to pick Cupcake as my SDK. Preferences. EDU, Rose-Hulman. Hello Preferences. I'll say video even. My first activity will be selected values, and my min SDK is 3. So it does the initial setup. Make sure that you don't have any errors with generating the r.java file or anything. Depending on which SDK you used, you may have gotten 3 different drawable files for a high, a low, and a medium. For the purposes of our example today, you're going to stick things just into regular drawable, so if you don't have a drawable folder, you can go ahead and make one. And let's go ahead and copy some files over. I don't want you to do all this layout work every time. It wouldn't be a good use of your time. So we're going to have you download some starter files. So you can go and click on this link in the slides. So you'll have to go to the slides on the course website. The course website, in case you're watching this video, is just rosehulman.edu Android. Once you download the zip file, you of course need to extract it. Looks like I've downloaded it many times. Should be, I think, 7 files in here total. And what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to copy these in to the appropriate areas. To copy them in, you can either hit Control-C, Control-V, or if you like, you can actually drag and drop them as well. I'll drag and drop today because in class I copy-pasted. There's a couple different things in here. The most important one is main, so you can bring main over. And when you bring main over, it'll ask you, do you want to replace it? And you should say yes to that. Same with strings. You'll have to copy over strings, and you'll have to replace. Then there are a couple other things. I tried to be a good programmer. I made a colors.xml, a dimensions.xml. So I put some of the dimensions that I used in the main.xml into their own resource. And then I also made this file keys.xml. The keys we're going to use today with our preference activity, just to kind of see what some of these things are. The keys are really just strings, so I could have put them into the strings.xml file, but I decided to keep them a little separate because they don't really need to be localized, so I thought I'd separate them out. Looks like it's got some kind of error for me in main.xml, so let me see what's going on there. Oh, I lost, I changed a name. I'll have to fix that. So hopefully I'll fix that and you won't see that happen. Cool, so what we've given you by default, the main thing we've given you is this main.xml. This main.xml does some of the layout work for you, just to make your life a little bit easier. The important thing that you do need to know, though, is that a lot of these things have references that you're going to need to know about. So, for example, this TextView has an ID, and you're going to have to change that in code, as does this one. I tried to be good about using other resources. So, for example, there's a color resource for all these different blues. It's nice because if you change it in one place, you change it in one place. There's a dimension resource for how thick this black line is. So you can change it in one place. There's dimension resources for what the font size are of each one. So using these other resources, so dimensions is one that you haven't seen before, but it feels just like strings, right? It's just instead of strings, you have different dimensions. Cool. So this is what you've been given. You should go ahead and be able to run it. Before you run it, you got to do the most important task of changing the icon. All right, that's perhaps not the most important task. We're actually just going to make the icon for this one the preferences menu item. So IC_menu, so it's really for a menu, but we're going to use it for the app icon as well, and then just type in preferences. Great, once you get that, you can go ahead and run it to get it to show up in your AVD. Cool, so I paused it and let mine boot up. So it should look like this, should have all the titles. If you hit the menu button, nothing should happen. And if you set the icon, you should have an icon. I did it once in class. I think here's the one that I just made. Cool. So it looks like things are good to go. We're ready to start making some changes to this guy. The first change you're going to make is going to be a pretty simple one. The first thing we want to do is we've got this main.xml, and we want to be able to change these blue text. So there's 6 text views we want to be able to change. These 6 text views have the IDs that are shown here. So these are the text view IDs. And we want to capture them so we can change them in code. So there's some code here. I would recommend you copy paste this just because you know how to do this stuff by now, right? So we've got the 5, 5 or should have been 6? 5. We've got the 5 text views. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy them into my activity as member variables. Make a little space here, and I'm just going to paste those in. Great. Control-Shift-O to bring in the TextView import. And then I'm going to go ahead and just copy-paste this as well. And this should be reviewed to the point that copy-pasting shouldn't hurt your learning experience. The first thing that it does is it calls a function that doesn't exist. It calls a function called update text with preferences. We will be writing that as we go, but I went ahead and used Eclipse to auto-generate a stub for me. Cool. So we're ready to get started. And so what we'd like to do first is we'd like to go ahead and make our preference activity class, get that ready. What I called mine is I called it My Favorite Preferences, which is not necessarily a great name, but good enough for now. The important thing is that you set the superclass to be not just an activity, but a preference activity. So let's go ahead and do that. So right-click, New Class, and I'm going to call it My Favorite Preferences. And then I'm going to change the superclass to be a preference activity. Kind of nice for them to include this nice activity that you can subclass. Great. And so we've got that set up. And the first thing that we're going to add in here is an onCreate. So start typing it and hit Control Space. Typically what you do in an onCreate is you set the content view. Preference activities are a little bit different. What you need to do with the preference activity is you need to say add preferences from resource. So you say add preferences from resource, and you have to give it a resource. So we're going to say use the file My Favorite Preferences. Here Kingsley chewing away over there. One thing you might have noticed that's odd about this is that it says XML. That's something we haven't used before. So just like how menu went into its own folder called menu, preferences go into a folder called XML. XML is kind of a catch-all folder for XML files that didn't fit well into another category. So we've got to make this file. Used to, what I'd do is I'd make the folder first, so I'd right click and I'd say new folder, but I learned a new trick in class today that I want to try, and that is I just want to right click on the project and say new, there's a bunch of ways you get there, but new Android XML file, and I'm going to say My Favorite Preferences, preferences.xml, and right now you can say it doesn't know what folder it is. I would like this resource to be of type preference. Cool. And you can see that it actually says this one needs to go into res/xml. That's actually really nice because there's less chance of me making the wrong folder. So that was kind of cool. That is a nice trick. Once I say OK, you can see my red X's went away. I've now got a preferences XML file that I can modify. You can see what they stub in for you is just a preference screen, a lot of the standard boilerplate stuff. And what we want to add is we want to add a single item at the top level. You can see there are a lot of preferences. We can add checkboxes, edit texts, list preferences, a preference, which is kind of the parent to everybody else. Other things you can read. For now, we're just going to add a preference. And in the title, just type test only. Eventually, we'll use string resources, but I just want to have something up in this activity so that we can see that it's working, right? So just something that says, I mean, if you see the words test only, you know you've made something successful. So with the resource and then this add preferences from resource, we've actually got the preference largely ready to go. let's go ahead and catch up the slides a little here. So add preferences from resource, creating that file, adding the test only. The thing that I want you to do next is I would like you to try to create a menu that has an icon that looks like the preferences, says the word settings, and then when you click on that menu item, have it create an intent, start the activity for that intent, and launch this preferences screen. So go ahead and take a minute and see if you can do that. A great review of doing menus should remind you of a lot of things. Strongly recommend you do it without my help. But hopefully you've paused it, and I'll try to go through it pretty quickly because hopefully you've done it and succeeded. So we want this menu to launch from the selected values activity. So inside selected values, we're going to say on create options menu. Inside the on create options menu, I'm going to go ahead and call super. I'm pretty sure that with the Boolean ones you don't need to call super, but I'm going to. And the thing that we need to do is just like we've done before, you need to get the menu inflator. It's weird to type menu item there. So I'm going to call it the options menu inflator. And the way we get it is you just say get menu inflator. What the menu inflator does is it's used to do an inflate of a menu resource. So I'm going to create a menu resource called the options menu, and it puts it into the menu that was passed into this function. That's the exact same code that we wrote last time we did a menu. To create a menu XML file, I'm going to say create a new XML file called options menu .xml of resource type menu. You can see it's going to put it into the menu folder for me, which is superific. And the item that we're going to add here, you can give it an ID if you'd like. You don't have to, because whenever there's only one ID, you don't really need to to differentiate between who clicked to get you here. Go ahead and give it a title, and then give it the drawable so that it's got that nice little icon. And then once you've inflated the menu and added it within onCreate, you should be able to hit menu and have a cute little menu pop up, which is cool. Doesn't do anything yet, of course, because we haven't written that part. So we want this, clicking on this, to launch that new activity. Anytime you launch a new activity, you've got to go register it in the manifest. So we need to add a new activity to the manifest. The name of this activity is my favorite preferences. Never like typing anything, but it was easy enough to type. At the top, we're just going to let it display the app name. That'll be fine. You can do this stuff within the GUI interface, or you could, some people just prefer to just write the code. So the code that you would add is just name that, label that. It's an activity within the application. So I had to do that first just to make sure things didn't crash whenever I tried to launch it. We want to launch it when somebody presses a button on the options menu. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing I did before of calling super. And then I'll return true because I handle the action. Now usually check for the menu item's ID, right? So that would be the first thing. So usually you'll have a switch statement in here that switches based on the ID. Since there's only one, I know who clicked it. So I'm just going to skip that step. And I'm just going to create a new intent. This intent will be called the prefs intent. And an intent needs the context followed by the class that you're going to launch. Once you make an intent, that's all well and good, but nothing actually happens until you start activity. You can either start activity or start activity for result. We're just going to use plain old start activity. The difference is, as a reminder, start activity for result. You get called back to a function whenever you say call start activity for result. But if you just say start activity, you don't get notified whenever it returns control, which is actually going to be fine in this app. So I'll just say start activity. Cool. Once you've got that, hopefully you've got a menu item. And then when you click the menu item, it creates an intent and launches your activity. So if everything worked for me, I've got a menu, click it, presto, it displays my preferences activity. At present, my preference activity doesn't do anything, but at least it launched, which is kind of neat. And you can go back by hitting the back button. Great. Catch up the slides a little here. Inflate the menu, create a menu resource, making sure to add the activity to the manifest. By the way, the reason I was able to capture this screenshot is because I accidentally did this. Usually you check for the menu item ID, but in this case you don't have to. But now presto, it should launch the preferences. Cool, so now we've kind of laid the groundwork to play with preferences. Let's start actually adding some real preferences to this thing. We're going to start off by adding a couple of checkbox preferences. So those are the first preferences that we're going to add. So let's go ahead and do that. So the place where you're going to modify your preferences is in your XML file, so your resource file. At present, there is a test only. You can remove him. We're done with him. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to start adding things. There's a bunch of different preferences, and one of them is called a preference category. Really, this is just a divider bar. But we're going to go ahead and add a divider bar. The way that the GUI works is all of these are subclasses of preference. It's kind of like the uppermost. And so it's got certain properties you can set. And then also this one's a subclass of group. So a category is a group. And there are things you could set there. The only thing that I want to set on categories is pretty much just the title. And I've got a bunch of strings for you here. The title for this one, I believe, is pet category. So we're going to do a dogs and cats thing. So we've got a title called the pets category. And you typically don't want to set anything else on the category. You just want to put stuff in it. It's just for visual effect, right? It doesn't really do anything. It's just for visual effect. And then inside of it, so I'm going to create a checkbox preference. Checkbox preference, you can see it's got attributes for a preference, and then it's got some specialty attributes because it's a checkbox. To start with, we'll just play with these. So each preference needs a couple pieces of information. It needs the title that's displayed. There's also an opportunity for subtitle. So the title here I'm just going to call dog title, and then the subtitle, also referred to as a summary, we'll say dog summary. It's nice whenever somebody sets up all your strings.xml. So we've got all these strings in here, and you can see what they are. But I've gone ahead and prepared a bunch of strings for you. You also need a key for each preference. And as I mentioned previously, there's a file called keys.xml. Really, these are just strings, but I wanted to keep them in a separate file because they don't need to be localized. But I do like keeping them in a resource. That way you can reference it from both code or from your preferences.xml file. So the key for this one, all the keys start with the word key. This one is key dogs. Great, and then we'll do the same thing for cats. So we've got a key cats. a cat's title, a cat summary. There's a couple summaries for cats. We're just going to do cat summary first, and then we'll play some changes later. If you run it at this point, you should hopefully have a category and then 2 items in the category. So menu, preferences, and so you can see that there's dogs, there's the title, then there's the summary here, cat summary there, and these are checkbox preferences, so you can set the preferences for them. Pretty much instantly you can see that preferences do a lot more for you than menus did. So with menus, it wouldn't have even checked the box for you, right? Like you had to do that yourself. But you can see that it automatically handles that situation for you. Another thing it does, which is kind of neat, is it's a shared preference, which is naturally stores the values. So it's this activity, which is great, but it's also a preference, which is what we've been using for permanent storage, right? So it's naturally stored. So if you change it and you close the app, doesn't matter. These things are stored forever. They're already naturally stored to the system, which is great. So not only does it do the checkboxes for you, but it already stores it and saves it all for you as well. I guess the double bar here looks a little weird. If you want, you could add a theme to where it doesn't show the title bar. I could figure that quick enough. So we just wanted to add a theme onto this guy. Can we browse for a theme? I didn't think so. So you can figure out what theme it needs to be. You can go look up the style. I remembered that our linear lights out had some information about what the theme structure was. So the about activity I recalled. So it's at Android :style /theme dot. Yeah, I would have never remembered all that. And then there are a bunch of different themes. To be honest, the easiest way to remember the themes is to go to like the layout, so the main.xml, and it shows you a bunch of different themes. So no title bar is just no title bar. Great, I can type that. No title bar. And it might look a little better without a title bar for the preferences. Your choice. Cool. So you can see that I changed that theme for this activity for it not to have that title bar. And now the first thing in here is just the category, just because it looked like a weird double bar. All right, enough of my sidetrack. What we were talking about was checkboxes. Another thing you can do with checkboxes, which is kind of neat, is you can actually change the summary here. You can change it very easily based on whether it's checked or not. Just to show you that, let's go mess with cats. Now I got too many things open. So with the cats one, what we're going to do is, since this is a more specific type of preference, instead of just having a plain old summary, we can have one summary that's displayed when it's on, so it's called cat summary on, and then a different summary that's displayed when it's off. So depending on whether it's on or off, it will display a different piece of information about cats. To see what I made for those strings, you can run it. And it says, when it's checked, it says, I love cats. And then when it's unchecked, it says, not big on cats, no way. So you can see that it's really easy to change that summary with a checkbox. No code involved. You can just set those in your resource, which is kind of nice. Speaking of code, if we hit back, you can see that nothing updated here. That's because we haven't done that yet. So let's figure out how to, if I check this box, I want it to say yes right here. And if it's unchecked, I would like for it to say no. Cool. So to do that, it's going to be over in that update preferences. So on the selected values, within onCreate, it called update text with preferences. And what we're going to need to do in here is we're going to have to set the text for the cats and dogs text views. So the way we do that is first we get the preferences. In order to get the preferences, the way we've done preferences before is we've said shared preferences, and then we've called it like prefs or something like that. And the way we've gotten it before is one of two ways. One of the options was get preferences, and then we've given it a mode. The other one we did was get shared preferences, and we did that one. This one is different because it's coming from a preference activity. And the way you do it is to call the preference manager. So this is something new, right? And on the preference manager, call the function get default shared preferences. You can see that control space is your friend, right? And it wants a context. An activity is a subclass of a context, so you can just say this. So that's how you get the preference. Cool. Now what we need to do is we need to determine if the key for dogs is set or not. So we're going to say if pref get boolean, and now we need a key. The keys were all stored as string resources, so you can say r.string. And then they all start with the word key. So key dogs. And so we're going to get this string. And then anytime you're working with preferences, if you get it, it'll give you back a value. And if it's not set, then you've got to set a default. Here I'll just say false. And so what I'd like to do is, if it's true, I would like to say, do you like dogs TextView set text? And for setting the text, there's a couple ways you could do it. One, you could get a string. I'll show you the slow way first. r.string.yes. I can type. And this works just fine. You're getting the string, then you're setting a text value. Somebody pointed out in class today, it's like, hey, that's overkill, because set text has, for text views, has a whole host of different ways you could set the text. So I've been using this one, where I pass it a character sequence, but they said, hey, just use the resource ID directly. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's way better. So you actually can just pass in the resource, and that'll be enough to set it. So if it is set, use yes. If it's not set, use no. And then we'll do the exact same thing for cats. So for key cats, we're going to set the text view for do you like cats? And do you like cats? Great. So if you run it, you'll actually know pretty much instantly whether it worked or not, because the preferences are saved, so it'll instantly show you what you last saved it as. There is a catch though, and right now it says yes and no, and if I were to change it to yes and yes, whenever I come back, you would kind of expect that text to already be updated, right? But it's not. If you exit the app and come back, it will be updated then, so that was nice. But really, that's not what we want just yet. So I mean, if I uncheck them and I click back, I mean, they should say no. Oh, you can rotate as well. That's like relaunching, so it says no, no. So rotating works. All right, so we got to fix this. I'm going to go and catch up the slides. So this is preferences, cats and dogs, setting the values. So it's on the initial update only, which is good but not great. It also works on rotates. What we need to do is we need to come up with a way to call this function update text views anytime something changes. We want to call this function. So when something changes, we want to update this function. There are a couple ways you can do it. One way you could do it, based on the skills you have so far, is you could have done start activity for result. If you had done that, then when that activity finished, you would hear about it, and then you could update everything. That would work fine. There is, however, a better way with preferences, and that is that you can register to hear when they change. So let's do this. Go ahead and copy this line from below to get the preferences, because it's the exact same. And now what we want to do is start typing register, hit Control Space, and you can see there's this thing called register on shared preference change listener. So you can probably guess from the name, which is a doozy of a name, that when they change, you're going to set up a listener, and so we need to create a listener. Just like we did with buttons quite often, is let's just go ahead and say this. It's going to complain, Eclipse is going to complain, and says this does not implement the necessary interface. So I'm just going to select the bottom option here for let it implement it, the on shared change preference listener. So it says we claim that we implement it. And then it'll yell at us and say to add the unimplemented methods. And you can see that it added this method on shared preference changed. So that seemed like a lot of busy work, but it's actually quite simple. And all it means is when the preferences change, it's going to call this function. And when the preferences change, we want to call update. So update text with preferences. So a summary of that again, you register to listen for them. Then we claimed to implement the interface. Then we actually implemented the interface. And then presto, we're going to get changed. We're going to get called when the values change. Prove it. Run it. So now, when they say no, no, we click preferences. And actually, as soon as we check it, they've changed. It actually called our update function. So it's a little inefficient, to be honest. And then with cats, whenever I check it, it also called that registered thing. And then whenever we go back, they should already be all set. And what do you know, they are all set, ready to go. Cool. So we're doing good. We've got checkbox preferences. To be honest, I mean that's really it for checkbox preferences. Here's the information for listening for changes, and the automatic updates are much better. So with checkbox preferences, we needed a key, a title, and a summary. You could also make multiple summaries if you wanted. And then in order to get it, you would say get Boolean, because they're true or false. So you'd say get Boolean. Let's learn about some more preferences. Also, take a break if you haven't taken a break. Take a break if you have not taken a break. So next up is my personal favorite preference. We're going to talk about list preferences next. I thought this would also be a good time just for a quick summary. So there are a bunch of different preferences. Preference is kind of like the superclass. We made a preference already that test only was a preference. A preference by itself is really not much good. I mean, it works like a push button. If you need a button, it basically is a button. Categories are good for visual effects. They're separators. Checkboxes are on/off. And then what we're going to do next is the list preference. For some reason, it's my favorite. I don't even know why. You can select items from a list. And then we're going to talk about edit text preferences. They're actually quite simple. You just type in a string. And then probably the most useful is the ability to create other preference strings. So these are all subclasses of preference. And we're just going to kind of go through making each one. Next up, list preference. A list preference is selecting an item from a list. So it has two new parameters, or attributes, I guess I should say, called entries and entry values. These are different, but similar. Entries are what's displayed to the screen. So this is what you want the user to see. So this is what they're going to have up there. The entry values are kind of what you use on the coding end, right? And so on the coding end, you can actually have a different thing that you see than what the user sees. So there's kind of this separation between the front end versus the back end. For the app that we're doing today, we're going to make them the same. We don't really need a front end versus a back end like this. There might be times where you would need it. But to be honest, a lot of the times you will make them the same, depending on what you're doing. So we're going to have two arrays. Just like strings and colors and dimensions, you could do it in code, but it's so much better to use resources. So we're going to have to figure out how to make arrays as resources. Something we haven't done yet in the class, but it's not too difficult. So the way you make an array in a resource is, well, we're going to make a string array. A string array has individual items in it, where with a string array, they're all going to be strings, right? For a string array, you have a couple of options. You can put it into strings.xml, or you can make a new file called arrays.xml. We're going to go with the latter option, and we're going to make a new file called arrays.xml. Into arrays.xml, we're going to put a single string array. Going to call it dessert SDK array. These desserts are not randomly chosen. Cupcake, donut, eclair, froyo, gingerbread, that's the one I'm currently using. Honeycomb, and then ice cream will be coming soon. So let's go ahead and create that file. So under values, a new Android XML file for arrays XML, and into it we're going to add a new string array. I said I was going to call it dessert/SDK array, and into this array we're going to put some items, and these items are going to be strings. I've actually already got these strings defined over in strings.xml, so I'm going to say @string and then what it is. What I kind of like to do for some reason is, I don't know, I do the first one with the GUI, and then after that I'll just start playing with the code. So cupcake, donut, eclair, froyo, gingerbread, and then I recently added honeycomb and ice cream. Ice cream's kind of a lame one. I'm still rooting for ice cream sandwich. Cool, so now we've got an array. It's set up as an array resource, so we can reference it in different places. And the place where we want to reference it from is we want to make a new list preference. For this new section, I'm also going to make a new category. So you want to create something at the top level, so you can say add, and then you can select this option for create at the top level a preference category. So this category, I'm just going to give it a title. It's called dessert category. And then it's going to have inside of it a single list preference. So this list preference, you can see that it's actually has preferences as a superclass, dialog preference as a superclass. Actually, instead of being called dialog preference, it should probably say edit text preference. I guess they were in some disagreement about what the names would be. I don't know, but it really should say edit text. And then the most important thing is the entries and the entry values. So these entries and entry values are going to be that array we just made. Entries is what the user sees. Entry values is what you see in code. We're going to make them the same. And then for the key, we've got a key called key dessert SDK. A title, this dessert title, and dessert summary. Didn't really need a summary here, to be honest, but it seems like when you look at a preference screen, it kind of looks better to my eyes, at least. If one has a summary, it's kind of nice if they all have summaries, personally. But if they don't have summaries, it's okay to not have summaries, but it looks weird when some do and some don't. Your choice. So we go ahead and set the title, the key, and the summary. We don't have to set the edit text options because it'll actually default to use the title from the preference. So we don't have to set anything there. And we've already got the array list set. So at this point, you should be able to see it, right? So you should be able to see stuff happen. So if we go into the preferences, we've got a dessert /SDK. When we click on it, it brings up the options that you might choose. My favorite is, well, gingerbread. That's what I'm currently using, but my favorite seems to be cupcake because that's what I usually make these demos for. If you click on back, you can see it doesn't update yet. Let's go fix that, and then we'll be done with the list preference. So the list preference, whenever I first started playing with it, I really didn't know if it would be an int or a string or what it would be. It turns out that it's a string. So I'll just say dessert SDK is equal to prefs dot get. I really didn't know for sure whether it'd be get int or get string, but it's get string. And the key for this one is called r.string.key control space, called dessert SDK. If for some reason I don't, if it doesn't exist, what do you want to give me? And really what we should give them is the string resource called, I think it's called like no something. No selection? Yeah, no selection. So if it doesn't exist, give them that no selection string resource. So it'll always say something. Cool. Once we've got the string, we can go ahead and put it into the dessert SDK TextView. And so we can just go ahead and set that. And now when you launch it, you'll actually know if it worked or not instantly because it'll take what you selected last, which for me was cupcake. So you can see it says cupcake. And it also will update instantly. So if we switch it to honeycomb is going to be awesome. I don't know if you've seen the leaks of honeycomb, but it is going to be great. So 3.0, going to be some big changes in honeycomb. So my favorite, even though it's not out yet, is honeycomb. Cool. So that kind of does it for the list preference. You can see that there really are only two new fields, entry and entry values. It made this nice, pretty list for you. You could set the icon here if you wanted something different. You could change that. And we've got it already added to where it changes on that main screen. Cool. So there's the summary of list preferences. What I'd like for you to do next is you've seen two of them. You've seen checkboxes and you've seen list preferences. For the favorite color, I would like for you to create an edit text preference. And really the best thing for you to do is to just handle this one on your own, right? So go ahead and take a little bit, pause the video. I want you to make an edit text preference. You can make a new category for it, so the favorite color category. I've already made you a key, a title, and a summary. See if you can make the preference, and then you should even be able to fix the code to where it shows up on that first page. So pause it and give that a whirl on your own. So hopefully you got it working. I'm going to go ahead and do it here as well. I'm going to do it kind of quick because hopefully you got it working. So you say add. You want to add to the top level. I'm going to create a new category. I'm going to give it the title of favorite color category. And inside of here I'm going to put a single preference, an edit text preference. My edit text is going to have a key for favorite color, a title for favorite color title. Again, sure is nice when somebody gets all the strings ready for you, thanks to me. You could change things that show up like within that dialog. You could change the icon and things like that. I mean, just to prove that you can. I mean, you could pick on the regular Android icon. You don't really have to. Once you change the XML resource, it should show up for you, which will be kind of neat. So menu, settings, you can see it's got this new category, provide a color, anything you like, and you can see that it shows that different icon. So this nice little dialog is all made for you, and you can change the icon. Let's say my favorite color is hot pink. That's all well and good. It does not show up here yet until we add that code. So to add that code, we're going to say favorite color. And that's going to be under prefs, get string, and the key is the r.string.key favorite color. And the default value is the same as it was before, no selection. Once you've got it, you can go ahead and select the favorite color text view to the favorite color. Cool. Once you've got that, you can go ahead and run it. And just like before, you'll know instantly if it works because it'll show up and say hot pink. Boom, hot pink. And just like before, it already does the auto update. So I kind of like magenta personally. And when I say back, it updates and it says magenta. Cool. So edit texts are actually a little bit easier because they're things that you're familiar with. So entering in a custom thing is very easy. Changing the icon, very easy. Getting the information from it, it's just a string, very easy. So we're most of the way there. So the last thing that I really would like to show you is being able to drill down into like lower level preference screens. So this is exactly like submenus, right? So we had menus, and then if you couldn't fit everything nicely into one page, you needed a submenu. Same thing here. So you can make an entirely separate screen that's linked off of a preference. So let's go ahead and do it. So I'm going to say add. I'm going to start at the top level again, and I'm going to make a category first. For my category, I've got a title in here called weekday category, I believe. And then now inside of this, what I'm going to put is I'm not going to put a checkbox or edit or a list. I'm actually going to put a new preference screen. So it's really pretty slick. Kind of like the top level, you can have a bunch of preferences in there. You've got kind of a fresh start here. Another neat thing is that a preference screen is actually a subclass of preference, which kind of feels weird that the major screen is actually a subclass, but don't worry about that. And this is important because you want a title and a summary to show up, right? So we want a title, which I'm going to call weekday title, and a summary, which I'm going to call weekday summary. It is a little different though because it does not need a key. It's just a screen, kind of like a category. It's mainly for visual purposes, but it does need a title and a summary because that's what's going to show up to the user. So those are all set. So those should be good. Inside this new screen, we're going to put a bunch of checkboxes. You should already be familiar with checkboxes, so I won't take a lot of time with that. I'm just going to make a checkbox for each day of the week, the weekdays. So for Monday, I'm sorry it was called Monday instead of Monday title. I'm not going to use summaries on this new drill down list, but I am going to use titles. So key Monday. What I kind of like to do is whenever I mass produce something, I kind of like to do the mass production in code. Your choice. This one might be faster to do. Oops. For some reason, auto indent doesn't work here unless I get rid of my white spaces. Little glitch there. Hopefully they fix that. So I'm going to need one for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I'm just going to come in here and just change each of these. to the appropriate date. So twos, wins, and so on and so forth. Cool. So at this point, it should show up with this separate screen, and these are 9 different preferences, right? Sorry, 5 different preferences, bringing our total up to 9. That's what I meant to say. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on this screen, and then now we've got this new drill down area. It's got its own little category, a title and a subtitle. And when you click on it, it brings up a new screen which has 5 preferences for it. Currently, this class is being taught on only just Wednesdays and Fridays. It's just a 2-credit hour. And you can see that it doesn't display the text yet, so we need to fix that. I don't want the text to be the focus of this app, so I'm going to tell you just to copy paste this. So if you flip through in the slides, you can see that it launches a new preference screen. It looks super sharp. Like, that's what's so nice about using this, is you can see they're all separated with this like cool looking line. All the margins look nice. The images look nice. It's just so nice. To update the front screen, I'm sure there's plenty of ways to do this, but you need to get the Boolean for each checkbox. And then what I did is I just used a little ternary if statement to basically append on each day. Sure, there's plenty of ways to do it, but this works fine. So I'm just going to copy paste that. And now if I run it, you'll see like right off the go it should update. And it says days we have class Wednesday, Friday. If you change it to be all of them, you can see it shows up with the complete list. And you can change it to whatever days. At Rose-Hulman, typically you have class like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, which makes for a nice weekend Wednesday. Cool. So that's the bulk majority of what I want to show you. That shows you all the different preferences that we're gonna let you look at, which is pretty complete, right? I think that's actually all of them. The one thing that I wanted to do is you can actually sometimes preferences are dependent. So like you might have like a "Are you pregnant?" but before that you have an "Are you male?" or "Are you female?" question, and if they say that they're male, you would like for the next preference to maybe be grayed out or something like that. We don't have anything that fits that category, so what we're going to do is we're going to say if you like dogs, then that means you don't like cats. So dog people are not cat people. So what we're going to add is if you ever check dogs, we want it to gray out cats. And really the reason for doing this is I want you to see how to modify these things in code. So this finishes up the screen summary. Now what we're going to talk about is modifying preferences in code. So very similar to what you do with like text boxes or anything else, is you can, if you want, go ahead and make member variables for these preferences. So we're going to get a checkbox preference for dogs and for cats. And just like we captured things before, we capture them here, but with slightly different code. So we typecast it. That's very similar to what you've done before. But instead of saying find view by ID, you say find preference. And you find the preferences by their key, which that makes sense because key is similar to an ID. So I'll just say string r.string.key dogs. So we'll go ahead and get a reference to both dogs and cats, because one will read and then the other will modify. And we're going to eventually update these in multiple places, so I'm going to make a little function for the rest. I'm just going to call update preferences. Preferences. And because I'm truly lazy, I'll let Eclipse dub it out for me. So what I would like to do in here is I would like to get the dogs, whether the dogs is checked or not. There's a couple ways that you could go about doing it. The way that we're going to do it here is since you've actually got the preference, so like you've actually got access to the preference directly, you don't have to call like get boolean or anything like that because it's a preference object at this point and you're not referencing into it. So you just say, I believe it's is checked. Yep. So if the dogs is checked, what we'd like to do is we'd like to uncheck cats. So if you like dogs, then we're going to set the checked on cats to false. So if we ran it like this, it would remove the check, and that would be good. But we're going to go one step farther. Not only are we going to remove the check, but we are going to disable it. So you cannot recheck it. And if you don't like dogs, then we will allow you to check cats. That's fine. This will prevent you from clicking the box. It's also nice to gray out the box. And that is done with another thing. All this is new, right? Called should disable view. To be honest, I think this should usually be yes. So I want the view to be disabled if its checkability is disabled, right? So this just visually grays it out if it can't be checked, which I think that's always a good thing. So let's go ahead and run this. There is one flaw. Right now it only calls it when the activity first launches. That's okay. We'll fix it. We'll fix it. So when the activity first launches, right now it says yes and yes. So we do like dogs. So when I launch it now, cats will be grayed out. And so you can see cats is grayed out. The one limitation that we currently have is that if you uncheck dogs, cats is still grayed out because it only updated it on the launch, right? If you gray it out and then you come back, then it's changed. And so you can see same problem now. Now if you check it, it doesn't change. So it's just like we did before, right? So it updates on the launch, and that's working fine, but it's not really useful until it updates real time. So the question is, how do we get it to update real time? There are a couple options. One thing you could do is you could register to listen for changes. That would totally work. Just like the other one, listen for changes, you can make this class also listen for changes. That would be fine. But since we're inside the preference activity, we can actually do a little bit better. Whenever a preference is clicked, there's a function called, I believe it's on preference tree click. Yeah, there we go. On preference tree click, which is kind of a crazy function. What it does in this function is it passes you in a couple of things. It passes you in the preference screen, so it lets you know what screen it's on. So like, is it on the main screen? Is it on the sub screen? So it lets you know what screen it's on, so that might be a nice thing to filter by. And then it also lets you know which preference it was. So in our case, what we're going to say is if the preference that was clicked is the dog preference. So if it was dogs, I suppose I should have called that dogs preference. That would have been a better name. If it is, then we're going to handle this situation. We'll return true. And what we would like to do is we will update we'll just call update preferences. So with this, it will real-time update the screen. If it was not the dogs, then we don't really want to do anything. I'll go ahead and call the super. Your other option is you can call the super first, but I'll just do it this way. I'll just call the super there. Should work fine. If it doesn't, I'll fix it. And now it should update real time. So right now we do like dogs, so cats will be grayed out. If I decide I'm not a dog person, then you're allowed to like cats. But if you say you like dogs, then that one's not applicable, right? So this concept of something being not applicable certainly could come up, and you can see that this is a nice way to do it. So you can't check this no matter what, but if this one's unchecked, then maybe you might want to check this. Cool, so that was the last little piece that we wanted to show you, and that is modifying things in code. To kind of catch the slides up here and then summarize. Ooh, I gave it a better name here. I called it dog pref and cat pref. You can disable things, which is kind of nice, and you can live update it once it changes. So, neat little example showing you a lot about preference activities, launching it with a menu item, which is a great review of menu items. We covered checkboxes, list preferences, edit text preferences, being able to go into subscreens, and then we finished with the changing things via code. Cool. So preferences are a nice little trick that you now know how to do. On any platform you can make a preference activity, and that platform will make it look appropriate with all the other settings. It'll make your app fit in with the rest of the system, and it's a really sharp way to store your settings. Great. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Between now and next time, what you're supposed to do, if you're a good student, is work on lab number 4. So lab number 4 builds on the Snakes app, but this time what you're going to be doing is you're going to be adding preferences to it. So you should have had a stub last time to go into the preferences. Some of the preferences we're going to let you change is we're going to let you change the colors of like the snake, the head, and the walls. And we're also going to let you change with a preference what the starting speed is. Don't know if you've played the game, but it starts kind of painfully slow. So we're going to let you change that and add a few things that should be kind of fun. So you can see it's in multicolors there. Great, so work in the lab. We will see you next time, and next time what we're going to talk about is dialogues. Dialogues are a neat little thing. See you then.